So we've seen so far that by the first decade of the 20th century, Europe had begun to divide itself into two armed camps. The Triple Alliance, which was Germany allied with Austria and Italy, although the Italian connection was considered to be somewhat shaky, and the Triple Entente between France, Britain, and Russia, although again it was only France and Russia that were actually fully militarily committed to supporting one another. The incident that eventually kick-started the entire First World War began in the Balkans Peninsula. The Balkans Peninsula for centuries had been controlled by the Ottoman Empire. But as Ottoman Empire power declined in the late 19th century due to the fact that the Ottoman Empire wasn't simply as modernized as the rest of Europe, certainly wasn't an industrial power in any way, and therefore was no longer really able to compete politically, economically, or militarily with the other major European powers. As its power receded, other powers saw an opportunity to expand, especially into the Balkans Peninsula. So we have the map here. This map is actually from 1912, but in the late 19th century, much of this area here, the southern Balkans Peninsula, still belonged to the Ottoman Empire. The three powers that hoped to gain from this declining Ottoman influence was Austria-Hungary, Serbia, the independent kingdom of Serbia, which had been established in 1878, and Russia. So the three of these powers are all kind of fighting amongst one another to kind of carve up what's left of Ottoman control in the Balkans Peninsula. We saw from the Treaty of Berlin in 1878 that the Austrian government had been given kind of administrative control over Bosnia. So the map's not very clear here, but this is Bosnia here, the province of Bosnia, where the mouse cursor is. Although it actually technically remained part of the Ottoman Empire. In 1908, Bulgaria broke away from the Ottoman Empire. So suddenly this large area in purple, became independent. And the Austrians decided to seize Bosnia for itself. They already kind of controlled Bosnia, but to essentially seize Bosnia and formally incorporate it into the Ottoman Empire. This angered Serbia. Many of the people who lived in Bosnia were essentially ethnically Serbian, and many of them wanted to join with the independent Serbian kingdom. Certainly many people in Serbia believed that Bosnia should not be part of Austria-Hungary, it should be part of Serbia. And some groups were set up, some paramilitary groups, what we might today call terrorist groups, were established in Serbia, the most famous being the Black Hand. And the Black Hand was dedicated to removing Austrian control of Bosnia and uniting Bosnia and Serbia as part of a greater Serbia. Austria, for obviously the same reasons, understood that Serbia was potentially a danger to its control over Bosnia, and it wanted to do everything it could to keep Serbia weak. It was afraid in particular that Serbia would encourage other Slavic groups. So, for example, to the north here we have what is today Croatia and Slovenia. They were also controlled by the Austrians. They were also ethnically Slav, or sometimes what is called South Slav, which joins the Serbians, the Bosnians, the Croats and the Slovenes, amongst others. And so they were afraid basically that Serbia, by interfering with these various Slavic nationalist groups, would undermine Austrian influence in the Balkan Peninsula in particular. So they wanted to do whatever they could to keep Serbia weak. In 1912, war broke out between the Ottoman Empire and Serbia. So let me go back to my map. Serbia, Romania, Bulgaria, and Greece. Essentially went to war to try and take the rest of the Balkan Peninsula from the Ottoman Empire, which they did. So it was a very quick war. The Serbians, Romanians, Bulgarians, and Greeks succeeded and actually carved up so much of, I'm trying to just go to the map here, much of this area, kind of South Bulgaria, Albania, northern Greece, southern Serbia, were all part of the Ottoman Empire until 1912. But that land was carved up, and essentially the Ottoman Empire was kicked out of the Balkan Peninsula, apart from this small little sliver of land here. So the question became what was going to happen with this area here, what is modern Albania. It was primarily Muslim in population. The Serbians wanted to annex it for themselves, but the Austrians were concerned that this would make Serbia too powerful. In particular, they were worried that Serbia would get control of important ports in Albania that would allow it to increase its economic independence. At this stage, Serbia was very much economically dependent upon trade with the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and so much so that the Austrians had actually sought to use their economic leverage over the Serbians by banning Serbian imports in 1906, what was known as the Pig War, because the main staple of the Serbian economy was pigs. And essentially, the Austrians forced the Serbians to back down. They basically said, well, we're going to create an independent Albania, and if you don't like it, we're going to declare war on you. And Serbia kind of felt humiliated by this, as they had felt humiliated by the seizure of Bosnia in 1908. Serbia looked to Russia as its main ally to kind of deal with this Austrian aggression. But both in 1908 and in 1912, the Russians didn't feel they had the support of the French to guarantee their help in a war with Austria, because they knew this would start a war with Germany. So both the Serbians and Russians had backed down. But this actually angered a lot of nationalists both in Serbia and in Russia, and made them very determined that if war broke out, if another crisis emerged, that the next time the Serbians and the Russians would not back down. And you can see the danger that's arising in Europe, that Germany felt humiliated by the Moroccan crisis of 1906 and was determined not to back down again. The Serbians and the Russians feel humiliated by Austrian humiliations and are determined not to back down again. And Austria is very determined to do something about Serbia and stop it from interfering in its own domestic politics. And this is how the situation is building up to lead to a war that ultimately no one wanted, but that became reality. So what kickstarted the war? Well, let us watch a little video to give you guys some insight.
He gathered bombs, pistols, and several accomplices. The boys practiced their marksmanship in the Belgrade Park. Princip was the best marksman. On the morning of Sunday, June 28th, the number of Black Hand assassins scattered in the crowd waiting for Franz Ferdinand's motorcade had grown to no fewer than 7. But one killer froze. Another couldn't bring himself to fire on the beautiful Sophie. A third threw a bomb. It ricocheted off the touring car's folded top, rolled under the car behind it, and exploded, wounding spectators and members of the royal escort. The perpetrators were quickly caught, and incredibly, the motorcade went on.
Here you might have expected, at the very least, that the Archduke be put in an armored car, or at the very least, in a car with a top. Instead, he rode through Sarajevo after the initial attempt in an open car with his wife.
Princip, out of range of the car, walked to a coffee house and sat disgustedly over his cup. Meanwhile, the Archduke had made a short speech and unexpectedly asked to be driven to the hospital to visit one of the bomb victims. On the way, the Archduke's driver made a wrong turn and was ordered to halt.
Where did the procession stop? Directly in front of the coffee house in which Princip was sitting. He walked out. He couldn't believe his luck. He was only 3 yards away. So, without even hesitating, he pulled his revolver out and fired 2 shots. One shot hit Ferdinand in the chest, the other hit Sophie in the stomach.
"Don't die," Franz Ferdinand pleaded, cradling Sophie in his arms. But she was already dead, and in a few more minutes, he would die too. Princip was captured.
Well, there was a trial, and the adults were sentenced to death. But Princip, who really was 20 years old at the time, was 19 as far as his papers were concerned, and therefore he was sentenced to 20 years at hard labor. He didn't complete this sentence, however. He died of TB before the sentence was completed.
So you see there the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in 1914 and the role that chance played in creating that assassination. Had Archduke Franz Ferdinand not been assassinated, would the First World War have taken place? Possibly not. Europe had actually come pretty close to war in 1905 with the Moroccan crisis. So it is possible that the war would not have broken out, or at least it would have been postponed several years until another incident emerged. But certainly once war broke out, once Franz Ferdinand was assassinated in 1914, it kick-started a chain reaction that ultimately caused the First World War. So Franz Ferdinand was assassinated in Sarajevo, which was the capital city of Bosnia, by Serbian nationalists, members of the Black Hand. Austria was determined that the interfering influence it felt Serbia had been playing amongst the Slavic nationalities within its own empire had to stop, and this was its chance finally to kind of do something about Serbia, to attack Serbia, if not to conquer it completely, and because in one way they didn't want to conquer Serbia, they didn't want more Serbs, but to weaken it substantially and stop its interference in Austria, and to consolidate its hold in the Balkan Peninsula. Of course, it was very aware that Serbia had the support of Russia, so that if it made a move against Serbia, that might bring the threat of Russian war into the conflict as well. Austria's hope was to localize the war, to keep it confined between a war between Serbia and Austria, but it needed to ensure that Germany had its back, as it were. So the Austrians reach out to the Germans and say, well, here's what we're thinking. We're thinking of possibly going to war with Serbia. We're aware that could cause a war with Russia. What is the position of the German government? And the German government gave what historians have called a blank check. Basically, whatever you guys do, we will support you fully. And this kind of emboldened the Austrians to make them more confrontational with Serbia, and kind of with the idea that if worst came to worst, Austria would be supported by Germany. The question, of course, is why would Germany give such kind of strong support to Austria, knowing this could create a war? Well, a lot of military planners in Europe by 1914 had concluded, that war is going to come at some stage. It almost happened in 1905. There was another Morocco incident, I didn't go into much detail here, in 1911 that almost had brought about war as well. And so from the German point of view, some people began to think, look, this war is inevitable. It's going to happen. And if it does happen, now perhaps is a good time for the war to be fought from a German point of view. That Germany clearly had an economic and military superiority over the combined forces of France and Russia in particular. But as Russia became more and more industrialized, that advantage was likely to disappear in the future. So the idea from a lot of Germans became as well, maybe we should support Austria now, let war break out, because if war must be fought, it's perhaps best it's fought now while we still have the advantage, as opposed to being fought in several years' time where we no longer have that advantage. So Serbia, just to explain, in a month after the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in June 1914, presented an ultimatum to Serbia. Basically, it was a list of demands, insisting, among other things, that all anti-Austrian newspapers be closed down, all Serbian nationalist clubs in Austria be closed, all members of the Serbian government named by the Austrians as collaborators with the Black Hand terrorists be removed from their positions. A wide variety of demands that essentially would have were kind of humiliating, or would have humiliated Serbia had they accepted them. And they also gave the Serbs 48 hours to respond. This obviously put huge pressure on the Serbian government. The Serbian government decided to agree to most of the demands, but not all of them. In particular, they refused to allow Austrian officials to carry out the investigation in Serbia of what members of the Serbian government might have been involved in the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. The Austrians were not happy with this response, and that same day there was a clash between Serbian and Austrian soldiers on the Serbian-Austrian border, and Austria decided to declare war on Serbia. So they declare war on Serbia in July 28, 1914. Austria and Serbia are officially at war, and as we will see, that quite quickly pulls in the other powers of Europe into what becomes the First World War.